Yevamos Daf is about the topic of Isser Chala al Isser. That is when you have a situation in which there is something which is forbidden, it's Isser, a certain object or activity which is forbidden for a person to do. And then you have another potential Isser that could apply on top of that one. Do you say that the second Isser can apply on top of the first one? And now if the person were to do this activity or to relate to this object in a Isser way, he would get two Isurim? Or do you say when you have one that prevents the second one from occurring, you can't have two? So we've seen that there's a Machlokes Rav Yossi and Rav Shimon on the topic. The specific case that they're discussing is that of a woman to a man where they are Eshes Ach and Achos Isha. The woman is the man's brother's wife as well as his wife's sister. Can both those two Isurim be Chal one on top of the other? So we've seen that according to Rabbi Shimon it cannot. It's either one or the other. According to Rabbi Yossi it can, and therefore you can get both Isurim. Now the Gemara has broken down Isser Chal Isser into a number of specific types of cases of Isser Chal Isser. Not all cases of Isser Chal Isser are the same. So we have three types of Isser Chal Isser that we're going to see or that we've seen already. We have Isser Mosef, Isser Kolel, and Bevas Achas. Bevas Achas is the most likely to say that both Isurim can exist at the same time, and that's when both Isurim begin at the same time. Neither pre-exists the other. And we have Isser Mosef. Isser Mosef is also pretty likely that you could have Isser Chal Isser. Isser Kolel is less likely to have Isser Chal Isser. We'll define those terms further on. Now, the Gemara is going to spend most of the time on this daf trying to explain a machlokes between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara. Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara had a machlokes about three cases of Isser Chal Isser. In all those cases, Rabbi Chia swore that Rabbi said you're chayav for both Isurim, the Isser is Chal Isser, and Bar Kapara swore that Rabbi said you're not chayav for both Isurim, you're only chayav for one. The three cases that they were arguing about was that of a Zar, a person who's not a Kohen, who did the Avoda on Shabbos. So the first Isser is that he did the Avoda, that's also for a Zar to do. Then the second Isser that goes on top of that is that he's being Mechal Shabbos. The second case is somebody who is a Kohen, but he is a Balmum and he's Tameh. For him to do the Avoda, when he was a Balmum, he was asked for him to do the Avoda. When he became Tameh, then another Isser of him doing Avoda, but Tumah was Chal on top of him. And the third case is that of a Zar, somebody who's not a Kohen, who eats Malika. So then he's doing two Isurim. He's eating both an Avela, because Malika is a bird which is not properly shachted, and it's also for a Zar to eat. It's also a carbon, which is also for a Zar to eat. So you have these three cases. And the Gemara again wants to know who holds like who. Rabbi Chia, Bar Kapara. What are they arguing on in Rabbi Yossi, in Rabbi Shimon, in both of them? What's going on? So the Gemara's first attempt is to say that they're arguing in the opinion of Rabbi Yossi in the case of Isser Koilo. These things here are an Isser Koilo. Now, Rabbi Yossi, we've established, holds that in Isser Mosef you do say Isser Chal Isser. Certainly, he says in Isser Mosef Isser is Chal Isser, where it's not Isser Mosef you don't say Isser Chal Isser. The Gemara now wants to say they're arguing as to what does he hold in the case of Isser Koilo? I have to explain how each of these cases is in Isser Koilo. How does that work out that could occur? So first of all, what's in Isser Mosef? What's in Isser Koilo? So whenever you have an Isser, there's a relationship between the man, the person who is Isser, and the object or Maisa, which is Isser. You need those two factors for an Isser to exist. Now, that man has other Isurim besides this one, and this object may be Isser to other people besides this person. So the case of Isser Mosef is that the second Isser which is coming to occur could certainly occur to other people. That is to say, this object or Maisa is definitely going to get the shame Isser of the second Isser that's falling on it, because it's going to apply with relevance to other people. So such, for example, if you have a man who's Isser to a woman, and then she marries his brother, so she's definitely going to become Isser to the other brothers who she didn't have a pre-existing Isser to. She was an Achos Isha to one man, and now she became an Eshes Ach to all the brothers, so it's definitely, she is the object or the Maisa of Isser. The brothers are all the persons, the people that relate to her. So since the other brothers are going to get the Isser, so the shame Isser Eshes Ach is going to apply to this woman, and therefore that's called an Isser Mosef. It's definitely, at least according to Rabbi Yossi, going to be Chal. Now Isser Kol is the opposite. Isser Kol is not that the shame Isser is definitely going to be Chal on the thing which is Isser, because it's going to apply to other people, but that there are other different Maisa or objects of Isser which are going to be Isser to this person. So there is no definite shame Isser that's being Chal on this object. This Isser that we're trying to be Chal, the second Isser that we're trying to put on top of the first Isser, is going to Isser other objects or other actions to the same person. But this actual object is not necessarily going to get another Isser. And we want to say, since it applies to other things or other, it should apply to this one also. So an example of that would be if a man and a woman are Eishes Ach, and then he goes and marries the woman's sister. So you may say, well, he's also becoming Asr not only to her now, but the Isser Eishes Ach, the Isser Achos Isha is going to apply to all this, his wife's other sisters as well. So therefore, they should also, the Isser Achos Isha should also apply to this woman. But here, we have to remember, the woman here is considered to be the Maisa Isser, or the object of Isser. And therefore, there's no shame Isser is going to be Chal on this woman that we're talking about who was already an Eishes Ach. So that's called an Isser Kola. It only applies to other women, it doesn't apply to the other man. We're always looking at it from the man's perspective. So the Gemara says, these three cases that are Machlekes Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara are all a case of Isser Kola. They're all a case in which the Isser will apply to other objects or other Maisim for sure, and you want to say, therefore, it's going to be Chal on this object or Maisa that we are discussing. So let's go through the cases one at a time. So the Gemara, so the first case we said is where you had a Zar, who's a non-Kohen, that did the avoda on Shabbos. So before it was Shabbos, it was also for him to do the avoda. He's the person. The thing which is also is the Maisa avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, which is also for him to do. Then Shabbos comes. He now has other isurim. He's also to do the Maisa Malacha in other cases. However, there is no shame iser. That is for sure. There is no shame Melachas Shabbos that's going to fall upon this Maisa avoda that he wants to do. So to say that it does, to say that just because other activities will become asr because of Shabbos to this same zar, therefore this avoda he wants to do should also get the iser of Shabbos, not only the iser of zar shishimesh. That's an iser kola. Second case, which we discussed, was somebody who's a balmum who becomes tameh. So as long as he was a balmum, it was asr for him to do the avoda. However, he was allowed to eat kachim. A balmum is mutter to eat kachim. Once he becomes tameh, now he has other isurim. He's also asr to eat kachim. Now, just because another isur applies to him doesn't necessarily mean that the avoda, which he was asr to do because it was a balmum, should now get another isur on it of tumah as well. That's isur kola. Now, the Gemara says, though, the last case, which is the case of Zar and Malika, there's no Isser Kol, because both of them begin at the same time. From the moment that this carbon oaf is shechted, this bird carbon is slaughtered, which is not through Shechita, but through Malika, it becomes both a carbon, and it becomes a Nevela to a Zar. So they're both happening at the same time. So this is not a case of Isser Kolel, so you cannot say that they're arguing about Isser Kolel here in the opinion of Rabbi Yaisi. So the Gemara therefore tries the second approach, and the Gemara says, so no, really they're arguing about the case of Bas Achas. They're arguing about a case where both these come at the same time. And all these three cases could have a way in which they work out that both these surim came at the same time. And the question is, what does Rabbi Yossi hold in a case where they both happen at the same time? We know what he holds in the case of Isser Mosif. We don't necessarily know what he holds in the case of Isser Kolo, but here we're the machlokes between Bar Chia, between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara is what does Rabbi Yossi hold in a case where both these surim happen at the same time. Now, the case of Malika always has to be where they happen at the same time. How could you work out the case of Zar Shishimesh, where the Zar did the avoda that both these surim came at him at the same time? So the Gemara says he's a non-Kohen who became bar mitzvah on Shabbos. Then the Isser Zaras and the Isser Shabbos, the Oraisa, both occurred while they both began when he became a bar mitzvah. Not that he turned 13, but that he got shtei saros, he became of age, he got the physical signs of being chayiv and mitzvos. So therefore, both Isurim began on him at the same time. What's the case of Balmum B'Tumah? How does the Isser Balmum and Isser Tumah begin at the same time? More says two ways that might happen. One way might be the same thing. You had a katan who was a Balmum and he was Tameh, and then he became a Gadol, became Bar Mitzvah and Chayiv and Mitzvahs while he had those two things. So therefore both Isurim began at the same time. Another possibility is that he cut off his finger with a Tameh knife. So the tumah that was transferred to him by the knife also made him into a balmum. Both things happened at the same time. Obviously, it must have been a swift chop, and that he became a balmum at the same instant that he touched the knife. So therefore, all three cases could be discussing where it's with asachas, and maybe that's machlokas Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara. What is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi? So the Gemara says there's a big problem with this, and the problem is that both of them, Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara, swore that Rabbi said like them. That means they each have to have somebody that they're making a mistake. You can't say that they're lying. Now, if they're arguing the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, so Rabbi Shimon for sure says one. Rabbi Shimon for sure says he only chayav one. So then I can understand that Bar Kapara he heard what Rabbi was saying in the name of Rabbi Shimon, that he was saying one, and that's why Bar Kapara said that he was saying one, that Rabbi said that you only get one Isser, you don't get both Isurim. And therefore Rabbi Chia could say, I'm very good. I understood Rabbi was saying, I heard what Rabbi said in the name of Rabbi Yasi. I hold that Rabbi Yasi holds that in case of Bevas Achas, you get both Isurim. Bar Kapara, he heard what Rabbi was saying in the name of Rabbi Shimon. So there's no problem according to Rabbi Chia. However, according to Bar Kapara, the Bar Kapara holds that both Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yasi both hold that in the case of Bevas Achas, you only get one Isser, you don't say Isser Chalal Isser. So what was Rabbi Chia swearing? He swore that Rabbi said something that Rabbi never said, because there is no Tana that holds that in case of Bevas Achas, you only get one Isser, which is what we're discussing according to Bar Kapara. So the Gemara says, okay, very fine, I'll switch it. I'll say that the machlokes between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara is in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon we know holds Ein Isser Chalal Isser, you don't get both Isurim. However, maybe in the case of Bevas Achas, he agrees. In the case of both happen at the same time, he says you do get both Isurim. That could be the machlokes between Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara. What does Rabbi Shimon hold? So Gemara says, now we have two problems. Problem number one is that we saw that both Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara jumped up and swore. They said, I swear that Rabbi said, Rabbi Chia said, Rabbi said you get two Isurim. And Bar Kapara swore that Rabbi said you only get one Isur. So I understand why Rabbi Chia was swearing, because he's changing what Rabbi Shimon holds from what we knew that he holds. We knew that Rabbi Shimon holds in a general case where it's not Bevas Achas, that you get only one Isur. Rabbi Chia is saying, I'm swearing to you that no, Rabbi Shimon agrees when it's a case of Bevas Achas, you get two. But what's Bar Kapara swearing about? Rabbi Shimon, he's just saying that Rabbi Shimon is no difference. The classic Rabbi Shimon is the same, whether it's Bevas Achas, not Bevas Achas, it's all one. What's he getting so excited? That's kasha number one. Kasha number two is the same kasha we had before, but reversed. Now we have machlokes in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. That means that Rabbi Yasi for sure holds that you get two Isurim, and there's a machlokes in Rabbi Chia. Bar Kapara, whether Rabbi Shimon holds in this case of Bevas Achas, you get one Isur, two Isurim. That means according to Rabbi Chia, both Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yasi hold you get two Isurim. What then was Bar Kapara thinking? How did he make this mistake? How did Bar Kapara swear that Rabbi said? Rabbi never said such a thing. There's no way that Bar Kapara could have made that mistake. So what was he lying? Of course, says, no, this I can answer. It's not that he was lying, it's just he misunderstood what Rebbe said. Rebbe only said his halacha in the first two cases that they discussed. He only said his halacha in the case of Zar Sheshimesh and in the case of Balmum Sheshimesh Betuma. Those two cases could both occur either in an Isser Kolel or in a Bevas Achas. You have both scenarios. Those are the two cases Rebbe was talking about. He never talked about the case of Zar B'Malika. Now, what Rebbe had actually said was that in the case of Isser Kolel and in the case of Bevas Achas, the halachos are different. He didn't talk about Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon. In the case of Bevas Achas, he said, there, the halacha is that you get both Isurim, like Rabbi Chia holds. And in the case of Isser Kolel, where the two Isurim did not begin at the same time, there you get only one Isser, just like Rabbi Chia is willing to agree. Now, Bar Kapara heard that, and Bar Kapara assumed that the three cases should also be included. He didn't understand that Rebbe was only talking about those two. He thought he should be talking about the third one too, because it's very similar. Now, he later went on, he learned other things, and he came back to the sugya, he forgot that he added in the third case. He assumed that Rebbe said all three cases, but now he looked at it and he saw that Isser Kolel doesn't exist in the third case. So Rebbe couldn't have been talking about the third case. So Rebbe could not have been talking about all three cases and have mentioned Isser Kolel, because Isser Kolel doesn't exist in the third case. Therefore, he said, Rebbe must have said only Bevas Achas. Rebbe must have been saying, he must have been referring to a case of Bevas Achas in all three cases. And therefore, when he said that there's sometimes it's Pater, and sometimes you get one Isser, sometimes you get two, we must be talking about Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. And therefore Rabbi Shimon holds that you get two Isurim under, therefore Rabbi Shimon holds in the case of Bevas Achas, you get only one Isser. That's the only way that could all work out. Okay, very good. So now the Gemara has explained the machlokes. Now the Gemara says, according to this, we have a brisa which clearly shows the Bar Kapara is wrong. And the brisa quotes the first two cases, it talks about Zar Sheshimesh, and it talks about Mom Sheshimesh B'Tumah, and it says in machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. It says that Rabbi Yossi says you chayav both. There is Isser Chalal Isser, and Rabbi Shimon says you're not chayav both. There is no Isser Chalal Isser, and it doesn't talk about the last case. Now, how do you understand this? It doesn't talk about the case of Zar B'Malika. Why not? Obviously, the machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon is only in the case of Isser Kolel, not in the case of Bevas Achas. So in the case of Bevas Achas, everybody agrees. Now, who agrees to who? So if Rabbi Yossi holds that in the case of Isser Koilel, you are Chayev Shtaim, you say Isser Chal Isser. Certainly in the case of Bavas Achas, he's going to hold you have Isser Chal Isser. That's even more likely because both Isurim come at the same time. Therefore, there's no way that he holds that you get only one in that case. So it must be that both Rav Shimon and Rabbi Yossi agree that in the case of Bavas Achas, you get both Isurim. Now that we said was the case of Machakis Bar Kapara and Rabbi Chia, and we see clearly like Rabbi Chia that both of them agree you get both Isurim. Therefore, we have a clear proof against Bar Kapara, and the Gemara leaves it at that clear proof. The Gemara accepts that. Now, the Gemara has a different question over here. We had said that you have a case of Zar Sheshimesh, where a Zar could do a Maisa, where he gets both an Isser Zaros and an Isser Chil Shabbos at the same time. Now, the Gemara is bothered by this. What action is both a Isser of Zar Sheshimesh and it's an Isser Chil Shabbos? There is no such answer. There is no such action. The Gemara says, which of the four avodas is it? Shchita is kosher b'zar, so there's no Isser Zar Sheshimesh. Kabbalah, catching the blood, holacha, bringing it to the Mizbeach, all you're doing is touching muktzah. There's no lav deraisa there, so that can't be it. Burning on the Mizbeach, that would seem to be a good candidate, but the problem is that Rabbi Yossi holds that burning, if a zar burns on the Mizbeach, it may be Chol Shabbos, but it's only a lav as far as zaros is concerned, so you can't say Chayev Shtaim, you get two karbonos chatos. So what then are we talking about? So the Gemara has two answers to this. The Gemara first is we're talking about the shchita of the carbon par kohen gadol. Carbon par kohen gadol is a machokes if a zar is allowed to do it, and we're going to the opinion that a zar is not allowed to do it. So that's both a shchita, which is chil Shabbos, and it's possible bizarre, and a zar is not allowed to do it, so a zar is chayiv kars for that. So Gemara says the problem that can't be what we're talking about, because then why are we talking about a zar who does the avodah, zar sheshimesh? According to this opinion, only the kohen gadol is allowed to do it. Even another kohen who does it is going to be chayiv for that. So we should be referring to a kohen who is shimesh, not a zar shimesh. Someone says, yeah, that's what we meant. Zar, we meant somebody who's not the one who's supposed to do it, not necessarily a Yisrael. So our second answer is the Gemara says, what's the problem? Because a zar that does haktara, burning on the mizbech, is only a lav. Who said here we're talking about chayiv shtaim? We're talking about two karbonos chatas. We're not talking about karbonos chatas. We said on the previous daf we're talking about did he violate two major isurim that he's going to be considered a rasha for. So he's considered a rasha even according to that opinion. He's considered a rasha for what he did, but it does not necessarily have to be that there's two karbonos chatas. Okay, now we get to the next mishnah. Next Mishnah discusses a scenario in which one action can produce four isurei chatas. Person has to bring four chatas, and there are four people involved for a total of 16 chatas. What's the case? You have two men who are makadesh each woman. So two men have kedushin to two women, one each. And then when it comes time for the chuppah, they switch. They each do chuppah, and they marry the other person's wife. So, what are the four isums? The first of all is an Isser Eishes Ish. Each one is together with an Arusa to somebody else, that's Eishes Ish. If they were brothers, then there's an Isser Eishes Ach, because she's also his brother's wife. If the two women were sisters, then there's also an Isser Achos Isha, and if they were Nidos, you could also have the Isser Nida. So you could have four different Isurim on each for a grand total of 16 Isur. Now, what do you do going forward? So the Mishnah says you have to separate them from their husbands, and they are not allowed to go to their real husband, their original one that they were Mekudeshes to, for 3 months, lest they be pregnant, and we're not going to know if it's a child of the first husband, and therefore of the first bia, and therefore it's a mamzer, or it's a child of the second bia, and therefore it's a kosher. After 3 months, we'll know, because we'll be able to tell how many months later she gives birth. A pregnancy could be either 9 months long or 7 months long in the days of Chazal, but it couldn't possibly be 10 months long or 6 months long. So therefore we'll know which one it is. Okay. So then the Gemara says if they were ketanos and they couldn't possibly be pregnant, then they can get remarried to their original husband right away. And if they were kohanos, then they cannot eat truma. The Gemara will explain why that is. So the Gemara first begins here. The Gemara is upset with the term they switched. They switched wives. Makes it sound like they did it on purpose. So first of all, that means that they're extremely wicked people. The Gemara says we don't usually have Mishnayos to talk about rishus. The second problem is that why are you telling me the 16 chata'os? Not 16 chata'os, there aren't any chata'os. If they did it b'mezi, they did it on purpose, then there's no chatas. Then there's certainly not 16 chata'os. So Gemara says you have to change the text. That doesn't mean that they did it on purpose. It means they got switched. They made a mistake. The Gemara says that also has to be proven from the rest of the Mishnah, because it says that if they were ketanos, they could go back to their original husband. But if they switched on purpose, then they were mizana. And if you have znos, then it's also about also the ball. They can't go back to their original husband. So the Gemara says that's not necessarily a proof. A ketana does not have a concept of znus. A ketana is considered to be raped, even if she's consensual, because she's a ketana, she does not have the das to resist. So therefore, it would be considered an ones, it would be considered a rape, and they could go back to their original husbands as long as they weren't kohanim. The Gemara says, okay, but earlier in the Mishnah we said that they have to wait 3 months. That implies that after 3 months, they could go back to their original husbands, even if they were gedolos. So there you clearly see that it has to be that they switched by mistake and not on purpose.